Intergalactic Fishing could be your favourite game. And I get it, could be, those two words make that statement apply to any game in existence, but I don't mean that as in it could be or it could not be. What I mean is that it's a game with such a laser-focused, unique experience, that if that experience clicks with you, Intergalactic Fishing could well be your favourite game. And as of early October, as I'm making this video, this tiny indie fishing game is my game of the year. In Intergalactic Fishing, you start in Anakobo Lake, one of the 64 lakes of the Ult network. With a universal lake teleporter, anglers from across the world can easily travel to these big fishing hotspots and ply their trade. And in these lakes swim fish of all different shapes and sizes and colours, all individually simulated just out of view below the surface of the water. Those 64 Ult lakes are where you'll start, and they're also where Intergalactic Fishing's main plotline begins to unfold. Using your fishing skills for good, not for evil, you embark upon this adventure that's half thriller and half environmental warning, but also half fishing tutorial, half dry humour, and half commentary on corporate greed. It's a simple story that guides you about doing various fishing tasks with decently funny dialogue that's maybe a little slow to appear on screen, but as much as I enjoyed unravelling the mystery of why the fish were dying in Anakobo Lake, it wasn't why I kept coming back. The reason I kept playing Intergalactic Fishing even long after I finished the story was to explore the infinite universe. For an easy description of what Intergalactic Fishing is, I could call it No Man's Sky as a small indie fishing game. Or if I wanted to take a jab at one of the most controversial titles ever released, I could say that it's No Man's Sky with a focus. And quite annoyingly, No Man's Sky has got another pretty hefty update between me writing this down and reading it out loud, but the comments that I'm going to make about it were definitely true the last time I played. Beyond the 64 known Ult lakes is infinite, boundless, endless fishing as far as the eye can see, brought to life by procedural generation. No Man's Sky is a good reference point for explaining Intergalactic Fishing. One thing I was really excited about doing in No Man's Sky was visiting new planets, finding out what species lived there, how they survived, how they interacted. Essentially working as an interplanetary biologist, documenting the universe's wide array of weird and wonderful wildlife. Putting aside any other disappointments with the game, on this biologist career front I was left a little disappointed. When I did find a new animal on a new planet, I could zoom in on it with my scanner, giving me all the information about the species. I could name the new animal and be rewarded with credits, and then that was it. The only other meaningful interaction I could have with an animal was shooting it. And that's not really what I wanted to do. An infinite number of incredible species, but all that really mattered was their appearance, because ultimately, all you could really do was look at them. The phrase most associated with No Man's Sky is, "Can I get my money back?" But the second phrase most associated with No Man's Sky was that it's as wide as an ocean and as shallow as a puddle. It used its procedural generation to create a huge amount of surface level content that left its players disappointed. Intergalactic Fishing is not that. Intergalactic Fishing may only be as wide as Anakobo Lake, but it's as deep as Lake HC31J48b. But in order to explain why the procedural generation in Intergalactic Fishing feels better than it did in the much higher budget No Man's Sky, you've got to look at mechanics. Click to throw a line in the water, then click and hold to reel it back out again at one of 5 different speeds. When your line is cast, you'll see a bar that's a visual representation of the force you would feel on a rod in your hands. A green bar shows a line under no tension, but the more red you see, the harder the line is being pulled. When you see movement on your line, you have to react quickly and hook the rod back to snag the fish before carefully reeling it in, pulling the fish towards you in bursts and alternating your speed to keep the tension under control. If the bar goes fully red, the line snaps, but fully green and the fish can escape. If the fish is small and you're not using the crappy beginner Ult Corp rod, then this shouldn't be too difficult, but there can be a bit of pressure and excitement if you hook something big that keeps pushing that red bar dangerously close to the edge. It's simple, but a satisfying and interactive approach. But reeling the fish in is the easy part. To be a skilled angler, you need to know how to get a bite in the first place. When you catch a fish, you can hold on to it to sell it, throw it back in the lake, or dissect the fish to learn more about the species. And this information isn't just flavour, it is crucial for working out how to catch them. Some fish prefer to dwell in deep water, while others may live in the shallows or near vegetation, and this is obviously pretty useful information to know. Find out how big a species can be, learn what time of day fish are more active and more likely to bite, and the big one, learn what sort of lure you'll need to attract them. Sorry if I annoy you with the way I say lure, it annoys me to say it, and I'm going to have to say it like 20 times. Lures can vary in shininess, size, noise and colour, and every different species in intergalactic fishing is going to have a slightly different preference for what's the most attractive lure. They all can bite any lure, but they're much more likely to bite one that matches their specific criteria if they see it. You start to learn where to go in a lake to find a type of fish, what times to try, and the sort of reeling speed and lure you'll need to attract it. But even if you know what the theoretical perfect lure is, you've still also got to build it. Building a lure isn't just selecting the values you know to be correct, it's piecing together an actual physical shape from Tetris-esque pieces in the lure fabricator. The lure's attributes change depending on the shapes that fill different spaces on the grid. Initially, it feels like a bit of a curious gimmick and takes a little time to figure out, but it's something that you develop a real knack for as you play, keeping lure design fairly simple for a master angler like myself, but much more rewarding and interactive than just having a menu to select values from. No matter how many lures I made in the game, there was always a little bit of pride to be taken from the ones that I absolutely nailed. There's a great gameplay loop of arriving at a new lake, moving between deep waters and shallows, testing the waters with a generic lure and stumbling upon a few lucky catches. As you learn more about the lake, maybe you find a species you want to get more of, so you start to piece together a specialised lure, feed the information you gain from the dissections through the puzzle of the lure fabricator, and after you've put in the work, you've set yourself up well to catch your target species with relative ease. There's also something I love about games when you're rewarded not by improved skills or higher numbers, but with information. Like in Game Dev Tycoon, where by analysing your published games you gain more information about development priorities for particular genres, allowing you to adjust your sliders more optimally for future releases. Which is one of those things that sounds really boring now that I read it back, but it really isn't. This is because information brings you, the player, further into the game. It's not a passive increase like a base damage bonus would be, you still have to act and engage with the game differently based on the improved information that you have. Like this excellent review that someone left on Steam. You can measure things in increasingly better detail and improve upward through a skill hierarchy solely due to the accumulation of specialised knowledge. What self-respecting person would not admit to enjoying this? Frigilord, 2020. And this is how the procedural generation in intergalactic fishing works to create content that doesn't feel shallow. Because the simulated fish have all of these quantifiable characteristics that not only make them unique, but require you to engage with the game's systems to adapt to the changes, it creates species that feel different in the mechanics. They also gain an extra level of life from the process of learning about them. It's not just a single click like in No Man's Sky. A fundamental part of the game is following hunches to chase down a specific type of fish. So when you do have full knowledge of your pink eye fish or your brown stoic fish or your TC14384 that you didn't get around to naming, it feels much more like an actual thing that exists and not just another random goat-looking creature that you scan once and never think about again. And of course, as well as the new species of fish, the procedural generation has to create new worlds for these creatures to inhabit. Or more specifically, just new lakes. Intergalactic fishing creates new lakes with new shapes and different varieties of regions. Maybe this lake is filled with pockets of deep water, maybe there's almost no vegetation at all, maybe there are smaller sub-lakes that can only be accessed through additional teleportation modules. And visually, in a game that's entirely viewed from the top down, switching a few colours and shapes and generating new patterns has such a significant impact on making a place feel like a new world through a strong visual identity. But there are also minor mechanical changes. For example, in a lake with lower gravity, you can throw your lines even further. Realistically, it makes little difference. If you find a lake with an enormous 1.3 times Earth gravity or something, you just have to move your boat a little bit closer. It's not going to be game changing, but it's a small, subtle difference that gives the procedural generation a bit more life. And really, I think this highlights one thing that indie games as a genre have frequently been more capable of than high-budget AAA titles: focus. By having such a narrow but engaging scope, intergalactic fishing only has to change a smaller but more significant number of parameters to create content that still feels different to the player. This makes intergalactic fishing an incredible exploration game. Teleporting to another new lake feels worthwhile because you want to know what's on this new world. There's a genuine thrill about the potential for significant discovery. In the 64 Ult lakes, it's the extrinsic motivation of catching and documenting in detail every known fish and every known species. And in the vast open universe, it's the more intrinsic motivation of finding something cool on your own terms. And Intergalactic Fishing has some of the key ingredients that a game focused on exploration needs. It has enough space and variety for you to keep exploring new places. The act of exploration involves the game's engaging and interactive mechanics, and the exploration always has the promise of discovery. Not knowing exactly what you'll find, but being sure you'll find something, and hoping that you'll find the thing that you really want. And in Intergalactic Fishing, one of those things that you really want is the 30-pound fish. There's a list that tracks the largest individual fish caught by any player in an unknown lake. And because of how Intergalactic Fishing creates its new lakes and species, there isn't a fixed limit on the weight of any fish, so there's always a chance of finding a huge species with an individual monster that could take you top of the chart. And that is not only thematic with my potentially fictional and idealised view of fishermen ganging together and bragging about their biggest catches, but it gives you something that you can always keep chasing. And if you ever do reach the top of that leaderboard or catch the universe's first ever 30-pound fish, the theoretical white whale, you would become a legend in the game's admittedly very small community. But also, in one particular way, this leaderboard and this quest to catch the universe's biggest fish also reflects the other half of what makes Intergalactic Fishing a joy to play, which is how relaxing and light-hearted it can be. 30 pounds is such a restrained number, it's almost aggressively mundane. The idea of the universe's biggest fish being less than 30 pounds is hilariously whimsical. The largest fish just on Earth, for contrast, weighs approximately 19 tons. But even the largest lake-dwelling fish ever caught was just shy of 300 kilograms. But this is a game about fishing across an entire universe. It just is whimsical. There's something so charming about the idea of intergalactic teleportation being used to improve someone's fishing trip. The idea that genuine practical teleportation was discovered and someone's first thought was the prospect of fishing in lakes never before seen. It's like Wallace having the ability to build a rocket to take himself to the moon, and he only does it to try a new flavour of cheese. Should I do my Peter Sallis impression? No. There's no time. There's something so endearing and relatable when characters or stories have this exaggerated level of passion for something. I don't love or even like fishing in real life, but I love how much this game loves fishing. It's also a very relaxing experience, much like I assume fishing is for some people in real life. A part of that is down to the game's sound design. Frequently, the game's soundscape is just the sound effects. Your boat moving across the surface of a lake, your lure dropping into the water, or the winding reel when you pull a fish back in. ASMR fans in particular I think would really like that last one. If this world has birds in it, you might hear chirping in the background, or depending on the weather, the gentle tapping of rain. It's all minimal and peaceful, and then every so often you'll get this music fading in that for a few fleeting minutes has this mystical and enigmatic quality, before departing and once again giving the diegetic noise centre stage. Also, as one of the most indie game things you'll ever see, all the music in Intergalactic Fishing is licensed under Creative Commons by none other than internet legend Kevin MacLeod. Mechanically, Intergalactic Fishing shares something in common with a lot of life sim games in that catching a fish is a lot like watering plants. It never really changes. The bulk of the moment-to-moment gameplay is the same few seconds of reeling and pausing and reeling and pausing. But like all good games of the genre, it pulls satisfaction out of the monotony. Even at its most chill, you still feel actively involved, and the mood is calm with an undercurrent of excitement about what you might find. It's genuinely one of the first games since Stardew Valley that's managed to capture me on both a serene and a mechanical level. And just before I get to the end, I wanted to quickly throw in a couple of extra things that I liked that didn't really fit in earlier, just little details that make the game a bit better. In the 64 known alt lakes, you can see other anglers plying their trade, and this differs the known lakes from the unknown in a sensible way. If you talk to these fishermen, they can give you little hints about lure designs for specific species in that lake, although occasionally you run into a complete git that just refuses to tell you anything and you really just want to sink their boat. There are upgrades, new modules, improved fishing rods, and even new boats that you can start to buy, including one excellent mini teleportation module. Sometimes lakes have mini little sub-lakes off to the side that just sit there taunting you as you realise you will never get those fish. Until you can. The mini teleporter is like getting a double jump in a Metroidvania or the air dash in Sunset Overdrive. It just completes you. And then there's the tension of the daily tournament. Like the biggest fish leaderboard, this is something competed for by all Intergalactic Fishing players, and it's by no means necessary, but it's the full Intergalactic Fishing experience condensed down into a tense 8-minute fishing extravaganza. The whole testing the waters, discovering new species, gathering as much information as possible, and then picking an optimal fish to try filling your live well with as much mass as possible before the timer runs out. It's interesting to see how the mechanics that previously created such a relaxing experience can also create something so frantic and competitive. There are a few small improvements I'd like to see, one of which being more game-wide goals to track. It's fun to chase down huge species to find the biggest fish, but some other leaderboards for the smallest fish or longest or most valuable would be cool too, just to add some variety and a reward for a few more types of discovery. There's also a little bit of a meanwhile back at the ranch problem, in that there's no meanwhile occurring. In most life sim-esque games that this feels like, you go out to the mines and then come back to your farm, or head out exploring and then come back to your ranch. But here you largely go out fishing, and mostly stay there. It would be nice to have some sort of secondary background progress, but I also imagine that would be an awful lot of work. Also, maybe a daily tournament that's just about trying to speed build perfect lures, because, this bit's really good. Overall, Intergalactic Fishing was just unexpectedly brilliant. I thought when I saw what the game was that I'd find it curious and enjoy exploring it for a bit, but since it came out in April of this year, I've played it for nearly 40 hours. 40 hours of top-down 2D fishing. And I know from having looked at the Discord and the Steam reviews that other people have played a lot more. And the only 2 negative reviews I've seen on Steam were from people who played approximately 30 minutes. Even after everything I've said, I still imagine that this game, just because of how it looks and the theme, is one with a very niche appeal, but for me it is an absolute hidden gem. And now that No Man's Sky has had another major update, I think it's time to see if that can live up to my expectations and become Intergalactic Fishing as a high-budget AAA title. Thank you for watching. Apologies for talking for far too long about what is ultimately a fishing game, but I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, why not subscribe to the channel and keep up to date with all the other cool games I'll write about in the future. If you're looking for something to watch now, I've got another video on the screen about a much bigger budget game, Insomniac's 2014 release Sunset Overdrive, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.